Hello, welcome to the second video in my web coding series. Today we're going to be making this. So what we've got here is a simple web page with a header, a main section and a footer. The main section has some different size text in it and a hyperlink. There's a nice large background image, and up in the header we've got navigation with hover styles. Now obviously I've borrowed this design from Apple, I think that's pretty clear, but I think it's nice when you're learning how to make websites to actually create projects that look like modern contemporary websites rather than some boring exercise from a textbook. Alright, so go ahead and open up CodePen. I'll pop a link down in the description and let's get on with it. So I've got a brand new pen open. First thing I'm going to do is head up here and give this a name. Remember, you can use the change view button here if you want to change the layout. This is my preferred layout. I'm going to collapse the JavaScript section and just give myself a bit more room for these two. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to begin with some page structure. So I want a header tag at the top, followed by a main tag, and then right at the bottom, a footer tag. And remember, we're not going to see anything on the actual web page until we either put content inside these elements or we head down to the CSS and we style them. So let's go ahead and add some style to the header. I'm going to begin with a height of 40 pixels, and I want a background that's quite dark, almost black. For this, I'm actually going to use the color picker that we looked at last time. Head over here, and something like that I think will be fine. Copy all of that code there, paste it in. Don't forget to pop those semicolons on the end of your styles in your CSS, it's very important. So now that I've done that, you can see we've got this annoying margin. We talked about this in the last video. This is being applied by the browser to the body element. We can get rid of that if we style the body, and I'm just going to say margin 0. Gone. Now let's go ahead and put the navigation inside the header. So up into the HTML, let's open that up. Now to create the navigation, there is actually a tag specifically for this. It's called the nav tag. So let's go ahead and create that. I'm then going to open that up, and inside, to create the actual links within the header, we're going to use an unordered list. Now in other words, a bulleted list. And I'll show you exactly what this looks like. So inside an unordered list element, we have list item elements. And what I'm going to do is just create 6 of these very quickly. So there you go, I've typed in all of the links, and now you can clearly see that what I've got here is a bulleted list. So if you're making a website and you want a bulleted list, this is how you do it. So there's lots of reasons why websites use lists like this for navigation. I'm not going to bore you with them all now, but one of the more obvious ones is that if you were going to create a drop-down menu where you have menus inside of menus, sub-menus, then having something like this is a great way to structure it. It's really easy to place list items within other list items. So our next job is actually to strip away the bullet points from this list, because although we've used the unordered list element, we don't actually want this to look like a list. We just wanted the structure of the HTML that we get from using a list. So I'm going to head down into my CSS, and I'm going to style all of the list items to remove the list style that they currently have. Here we go, so you can see the bullets have gone. Now you also notice that the whole list is kind of pushed along a little bit. We have a gap here. Now usually this is desirable. If you have a bulleted list within a paragraph of text, you usually want it to be indented. It just looks better. But in this case, we want to get rid of it. So I first of all need to figure out what's causing it. So I'm going to right click and inspect. And if I just hover around here, I can see there's nothing here on the list items. But when I go to the UL, the unordered list, now I can see that green section. That's the padding within the unordered list, pushing everything across. So what I need to do is go to my unordered list in my CSS and switch off the padding. So let's go down here. Unordered list. Padding 0. Okay, now it's time to get these list items to actually sit in a line. Right now, they're sitting one above the other. So down to my list items again. Now, the property I need to use here is called the display property. Right now, these list items are using block display. Block means one thing above another. What I'm going to do is to change the display type to inline block. And now we can see that they're sitting next to each other. We can't read them very well because they're dark against the dark background. So let's now change the color as well. So for the color, I don't want white. I want a slightly off white, and something like that I think will be fine. Copy and paste. We've also got this gap up here. And if you remember from when I inspected a moment ago, you can see that the unordered list also has a margin top and bottom by default. So I can remove that gap as well in here by saying margin 0. So that gets rid of that gap. Okay, so now let's space out our list items a little more. I'm going to add some padding to the left and right of, let's say, 20 pixels. So now on either side of my list items, you can see that we've got some padding that spaces them out nicely. I want all of my list items to be centered. So I'm going to go up to the header, and I'm going to tell everything inside this header to be text align center, American spelling. And now if I want to vertically center this text so it's right in the middle of the header, there's a few ways that I could do this. I could play around with margin and padding, but actually there's a really easy technique to use here. If you know that your text is only on one line, so I don't have any of these links where it spills onto the second line, I can simply tell this line of text to be the same height as the header. So if I use line height and set that to 40 pixels, those lines of text are the same height now as the header. So now we're going to go ahead and add in the hover styles. So I want these to change when the mouse hovers over them. And what I'm actually going to do is kind of invert the colors so that the text becomes dark and the background becomes light. So to do this, I'm going to create what's called a pseudo class. Now don't worry too much about what that means at the moment, but it looks like this. List item, colon, and then I'm going to type the word hover. So any style that I put in here will be applied to the list items when the mouse is hovering over them. So what I want to do is to change the background, and remember I'm going to invert them here, so I'm going to change the background to the text color that we've currently got, like that, and I'm going to change the text color to the current background of the header. So let's head up here and copy that from here, like that. And of course we can't see anything at the moment because remember this style only affects the list items when they're being hovered over, but when I hover we get this effect. So you might have seen on the example at the start that I actually had a couple of icons as well, one at the start and one at the end, a kind of phone icon here and like a basket icon here. So let's go ahead and do that as well. So I'm going to go back into my unordered list. The first one appears at the start of the list, so let's put it here, list item and close list item. And for this, I'm going to use an image tag. So inside the image tag, I'm going to give it a source attribute. We talked about this in the last video. The source attribute is where I need to paste in either an address to a local file or an address somewhere else on the internet for the image that I want. So what I now need to do is go and do a Google search to find myself a nice white phone icon. So I've typed in white phone icon. Let's go to images. I'm also going to choose transparent background. Now I gave you some tips on how to do this in the last video. The golden rule is avoid any image where you can already see a checkered pattern. Those are images from companies that are trying to sell you their images, and what would be the point in them providing the images with transparent backgrounds for free? What we need to do is find any image really that doesn't have a checkered pattern in the background. So I like the look of this one. If you click on it and you then get a checkered pattern, you know you're good. Now, this is actually a massive image. It's absolutely enormous. I'm going to use it anyway, but I do need to talk about that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the image address, head back to my code, and then inside the image source, just paste that in. Now, of course, the image is absolutely enormous. If you were making a real website here, You don't want your user to have to download this enormous image when you're only going to display it a few pixels high on the web page. It's not good practice at all. It would make far more sense for you to start with an image that is the right size. So you could resize it yourself in Photoshop, or you could find an image that was the correct size to start with. But for this example, I'm not that bothered. I'm just going to resize the image in my CSS. So I'm going to head down here, and I'm going to make all the images on my page height, and I'm just going to pick a number at random here to see how that looks. Actually, that looks alright. 15 pixels, I think we'll go with that. At the moment, when I hover over it, it kind of does this. Because it's an image and not text, this color style doesn't do anything. I need to actually put a separate style that changes the image when the list item is hovered over. Now that's going to look a little complex. Let's go for it. So when a list item is hovered over, I want the image inside it to change. Often these are easier to read backwards. So this style is going to affect all images that are inside list items that are being hovered over. And what I want to do basically is invert the color. So for this I can use the filter property with the invert function that looks like that. So now when I hover over it, it inverts. So that's my little phone icon. Let's go ahead and do a basket icon on the end of the list. So exactly the same thing. I need a fresh list item, and inside that I'm going to use an image tag, and inside that the source attribute. And now I need to go ahead and find myself an image. So instead of white phone icon, I'm going to put white basket icon. See what I can find. And this one here looks good. Let's click that. It's turned transparent. Fantastic. So let's copy that image address back to my website, paste it in, and it should appear the right size. There we go. So remember, the styles that I'm creating here are not specific to just that one or that one. These styles affect all images, and all images that are inside list items being hovered over. So that's our navigation done. We are only creating the design of the website at this point, so I'm not actually going to put any hyperlinks on these. So now let's have a look at the main section. So inside the main section of my site, I first of all want a large heading. And again, we talked about this last time. Heading tags come in different sizes, H1 being the biggest. So in here I'm going to put iPhone X Pro. I then want a smaller heading underneath that, so let's go for an H2 this time. Notice how I like to open and close the tags and then go inside. This is good practice so that you don't accidentally forget to put a closing tag on the end. So for this one, I'm going to type in Pro Camera, Pro Display, Pro Performance. After the H2, I'm going to throw in a paragraph tag. And for the paragraph, I want it to say from £399 or £299 with trade-in, full stop. And then finally, I want a hyperlink. So that's an anchor tag. Let's close the anchor tag. Remember, the text in between the two anchor tags is the text that appears on the screen that the user actually sees and clicks on. But we have to go inside the opening anchor tag and type in our href attribute, hypertext reference. This is the address of the page you want the user to go to when they click on the text. For now, I'm just going to drop in a hashtag, so that will just take it back to this page basically, but what it does is activate the link so it actually appears as a link on the page. Now I want all of this text to be centered within the main section, so now it's time to create a style in my CSS for main. And to begin with, I'm just going to use text align center. That puts everything in the middle. Now this would be a good point to change the font of the site. Right now it's using the default Times New Roman font, which is what you get when you don't specify anything else. Again, we talked about this in the last video. So what I'm going to do is head up to my body tag. Any style that I put on the body tag, remember, will affect everything inside that body tag. So I'm going to type font family, and the font I'm going to use is Helvetica, It's a nice clean looking font. It's great for modern looking websites. And there we go. What I'd like to do at this point is actually style the footer so that we can see it. It is there, but there's nothing in the footer and there's no style, so we don't see anything. So what I need to do is head down to the very bottom of my CSS. So let's go ahead and style the footer. I'm going to give it a height of 200 pixels. And I'm actually going to take the color from the header so that it matches. So I'm going to take that whole background style from there down to the end, paste it in. Now at the moment, my footer is appearing way up here, and you might be thinking, what's going on? The footer should be at the bottom. Well, what's actually happening here is that the footer is appearing directly below the main section. So this black bar here is the header. There's our main section, and then here's our footer. What we're seeing here is just the body of the page. The problem is, the main section needs to be bigger. See, by default, header, main, footer, and lots of other elements as well will expand so that they're big enough to hold the content that you put in them. So right now, this main is as big as it needs to be for all of that text. So what I'm going to do is go into my main in my CSS and tell it to have more height. So let's go in here and say height 800 pixels. And that's going to be big enough to shove that footer right down to the bottom. And that leaves me with a nice big space here now so that I can go ahead and put a background image onto my main. In order to do that, I'm not going to use the image tag inside here because that would place the image physically underneath the last bit of text, which is the anchor tag. And I don't want it to be there. I want it to sit behind all of this. It needs to be a background for the main. So to do that, I have to go into my CSS, and we're going to use the background property, just like we would do if you wanted to set a color for the background, but I don't want a color. What I want to do is set an image for the background. So for the value for the background property, URL. And then in here, I need to paste the web address of an image. So this website here is called Pexels. And this is just one example of the many free stock photo websites that are out there. So if you're making a website and you're looking for a nice high quality image, something like Pexels is a great place to visit. And I'll pop a link in the description for a few other free stock photo websites that you might like to try. So what I'm going to do is click in here and type in phone, and you'll see that all of these images are nice, crisp, good quality images. They're exactly the kind of thing you would see when you land on a modern website. Now what I'm looking for here is obviously the one that I used in my example earlier, but really I'm looking for any where there's a nice big blank empty space where my text can sit. I don't want something that looks really, really busy or where the text is going to go over somebody's face. So this one here is perfect, but feel free to experiment with some of the others. So what I need to do is to click on this image. Now, if I was making a real website here, what I would want to do is download this image so that I could put it in my folder with all my other web files and I always know it's going to be there. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to copy the image address from here. So back to my website, let's paste that in. So now I'm going to resize this image in my CSS. So still inside the main CSS style, I'm going to say background size. Now there's a few things that I could type in here. I could type in percentages, for example, and it would show the image at that percentage, and you can see that it's repeating the image to create a background. What I want to do is use a value called cover. Now what that will do is make sure that the image always covers this main section from top to bottom without any gaps. It will always fill it. Doesn't matter how big or small I make it, you will never see a gap appear at the top or the bottom. At this point, we're nearly done, but there are a couple of things that I want to do just to smarten up the look of this site. The first thing is to get rid of this gap that we can see up here. Now, we couldn't see that gap before because there was no background image inside the main, but it was always there. So let's right click on the heading here and inspect. Now we can see when I hover over the H1 that that gap is actually the top margin of the H1, kind of spilling out of its container. It's due to something called margin collapse, don't worry about exactly why it does this for the moment. All we really need to worry about is how do we get rid of that margin. And there's a couple of ways that you can do this, but probably the easiest way is to go onto your main and to tell it to have overflow auto. And that will basically get rid of that problem. And there we go, that's the website basically finished. Now, if you wanted to change the look of the text here, for example, to make iPhone X Pro bigger, well, in our HTML, we use the H1 tag to create that text there. So it would be easy for us to go into our CSS, style the H1 tag, and tell it to have a larger font size. So maybe I change it to 48 pixels, for example. And now it looks much larger. And you could do that with the other text as well. The last thing I'm going to do is just switch off the underline that we get with the anchor tag, because I think that looks ugly. It has that made in 1998 look about it. So to switch that off, really, really simple. All we need to do is style the anchor tag, and the style that we need to get rid of here is its text decoration style. I'm just going to put none, and that's going to get rid of that underline. So in the example I showed you at the start, I did a few other things as well. I changed some of the margins around here, so there's a big gap here, for example. So I could go into my H1 here and I could say, well, actually, I want the margin bottom to be 0. So now that closes up. What we're left with is the margin top from the H2 that's underneath it. So I could go here and say H2 margin top, and I could make it a lot smaller, so 5 pixels. There we go. So I'm just playing around with the margin in between these different elements, and you could do that for the paragraph and the anchor tag as well if you wanted to. But on the whole, I think we're good. So that's our second web page done. But if you want to make anything more complex than the 2 examples that we've done, it's simply not enough to have all your paragraphs styled the same, all your headings styled the same, all your images styled the same. You're going to end up with a pretty boring website. So we need to be able to pick out individual elements on the page and style them differently, give them their own unique styles. Now, in order to do that, we have to use something called classes, and that is what the next video is all about. See you then.